Welcome back for another episode of Mostly Training. Today, you have, for your listening pleasure, me or myself talking to you about things. And today, I wanted to start off with motivation and get this question every now and then, a little bit less recently, maybe because I've spoken to it before, maybe because on episode one of this podcast with Hamish Bond, we discussed this, and he said that if someone asks him how he stays motivated, then he already knows that they're not motivated enough to do the thing that they are asking him about in the first place. So, for example, if it's a young rower and they're asking him, how does he stay motivated to train when they're wondering if they have sufficient motivation to do the training that is required of them? And the answer is, if you're even asking the question, then you aren't sufficiently motivated. You might be motivated enough to do the training at that point in time. And you might be wondering, well, this feels hard. So how does someone like Hamish keep doing it? And it's kind of an apples and oranges comparison, because the people that you would ask that sort of question versus the people that ask that sort of question are two different species, at least for a particular activity. So one person might be motivated by rowing, but for someone else, it might be art. But for the artist, if someone said to them, how are you motivated to paint 8 hours a day, every day? To them, it would seem like an absurd question, because it's just something they do. They don't think about whether or not they want to do it. So motivation doesn't even come into it. And it might be because they'd been doing it long enough that it is this automated aspect of their lives. So for me, training, I don't ever think about, do I want to do this? The answer is always yes. The only reason I might not train is if my body is saying to me, hey, it doesn't make sense for you to train today. And then I still want to train, and I have to have this conversation with myself along the lines of, well, yes, but your body's indicating to you that you should rest today or reduce the workload. And what I want to do is what I had planned previously based on my goals and where I am at the time. So motivation doesn't come up. And yet when it comes to recording this podcast, especially the solo episode, which I'm doing right now for your listening pleasure, it is a bit more like the kid asking. I'm not yet the species that just does this automatically. It's hard. And I was thinking to myself yesterday, oh, maybe I don't have to record it this week. Like, maybe I never said how often I would do it. I just said that I told myself that I would, but I didn't say what would entail specifically. And I was thinking, oh, well, no one's really going to mind. And what difference does it make? I've got other stuff going on this week. I can record a solo episode this week. I've got other episodes with guests planned, so that's going to proceed. But I thought maybe just this week, hey, I don't want to do a solo Sam episode. And the other things I do, training and coaching and being with my family, and to a lesser extent doing some of the stuff that's required on my property. But for the people I coach, for my family, for training, that I don't have to leverage myself. I don't have these questions of, oh, do I have to do that thing? It's just doing it and generally and genuinely enjoying it. The podcast, I like having conversations with people where I can learn something, but this, I don't learn an awful lot other than how to speak to no one, because that's what it is right now. It's just me sitting by myself. How to do this with increased comfortability, which I think is a useful skill. That's the reason. But that doesn't show up for you. Well, at least it doesn't show up for me. And this is the whole point, is your goals, if they're for athletic performance, they might not show up for you on a day-to-day basis, because it might be a long way off in the future and you might not even have a crystallized version of what it is. So the question marks about, do I have to do this on a daily or weekly basis, they remain. Whereas if you know what the goal is, and maybe for someone like Hamish is, if he's achieved the goal a couple of times, then he knows you put in the work and then there's a payoff. But if you haven't gone through that process, you don't know if there is a payoff, and there's no guarantee of that. So you just are connecting with the work that's required. And that's where I'm at with this. I don't hate it, but it just seems like the part where it fills up my cup is not, that hasn't occurred yet. I am receiving some positive feedback. I did hear, based on last week's episode, but when I was refreshing on my time on the Australian rowing team, that connected with some of my former teammates. And I have also received just positive feedback about the podcast in general, and that is enough to spur me on. But really, the drive has to come from within. And as I've mentioned, it's not automated yet. So on occasion, it begs the question, and yet I'm here, and that's the main thing. I'm here for all the reasons that I would say about my training. The only difference is that it's still in that contemplation phase where maybe there's another option, which is just not doing the thing. But I said I would. I said I would do it, and so I'm doing it. And now that I am, even this morning I woke up and was like, fuck it, stop being such a baby, just do the thing. Part of it is having to set aside an hour, or sometimes if I go on longer than that, in a day that has other things like training, coaching your family, and other stuff I won't bore you with. It's just like you've got stuff, person, in your day, and maybe it's training the thing that you're negotiating whether or not you fit it in. But if you've made a promise to yourself, then you better fucking keep that promise, because that's your integrity, and you're nothing without integrity. Proceeding, something would spur my motivation for the podcast is questions, because I've listened to podcasts previously that do a Q&A type thing, and 3 good questions could occupy an hour, which is both good for the hosts in that they have something to reference and expand on, and they're also helping solve the problem for someone out there, the person that's asked the question, and they have the time to elaborate on whatever the inquiry is in a way that they couldn't on an Instagram Q&A. And the reality is when I do an Instagram Q&A, I get lots of questions, and most of them pretty good, not always. And I think it's because there's an immediate or semi-immediate, I ask the question, it gets answered, and I can see it right there. This is the same thing, but I have more scope to expand. And in the last couple of weeks, when I've said, hey, I've got some questions, well, if you have some questions you'd like to ask, it hasn't been crickets, but it's been quiet, despite me knowing that there are people listening. The sort of people that might, I get asked questions, and the thing I'm really trying to do is support people on their journey. And I know the support I can provide when I'm working with people directly as their coach, because I understand what their goals are and their limitations. If not for that I'm speaking to, in general, I'm also speaking about my experience, but this is basically would be like free, proxy coaching for someone that wants to extend themselves, perhaps have their curiosities aired out. But I come here in good faith, and if you ask a good question, and I will expand on what a good question might look like, because of the not crickets, I got two questions this week. And I do think there's something about the format of where I ask people to submit questions, because that may have been limiter this week just in terms of space, but you can always just send me a question and say, hey, can you answer this the next time you're answering questions on the Solo Sam episode, and I'll probably do that. So feel free to send them in. Feel free to tell people about this podcast. That's helpful. Then there's more people to ask questions. And ultimately, if there's more questions, then there's less of me kind of sitting here. And I'm sitting cross-legged or in 90-90 for those that are just on the Spotify, how I record this is I've got laptop incense burning. Check it out. Incense burning, the atmosphere. And I sit on the ground, which I try and do as much as possible. And I rotate between different positions because, not because it's the perfect recording experience, but I would encourage people to adopt positions with their body throughout the day that best support its health and function, which doesn't usually include sitting in a chair. And that would be my options at the moment, either walking and recording this. I could do like a desk treadmill, and I've considered it, although I don't, it's not entirely respectful to the listener how I'm getting a workout. Maybe you are too, but I'm not there yet. And I don't want to sit at a desk because over time that just makes my hips feel not great. So on the ground it is. And I've got these questions. Okay, so the first not great question is, and I'm thinking this has maybe got something to do with the space, the brevity and lack of, I could say politeness, but also anyone with a sub 6 2K erg and sub 6 2K or equivalent 1500-3000 run. So let's assume that's meters. And let's assume that the person is asking if there's someone that's done a sub 6 2K, which is, we know what that means, and then a sub 6 minute 2K run or the equivalent 1500 or 3000 meter run, which he hasn't said what would be the equivalent for 1500 and what would be the equivalent for 3000. So I guess this person wants me to do that conversion for him and then would like to know if I know of such a person. Well, two things I don't. And the second thing is I'm not a fucking almanac or I'm like, I know some shit, but this is not, I'm not, sorry, let's be more polite. Okay. That's not what that's not what I'm doing here. I'm not a factoid. I'm not chat GPT. I'm trying to help people. And all would be doing here is helping your curiosity, but you're not curious enough to even, I don't think, look for yourself or do the conversions to help me do the inquiry on your behalf. So this is just, I'm interested. I mean, I'd be interested if this person, if so, not the question asker, but the person that has, if there's a person that's done this thing. So if we were gonna, I'm not going to do the 1500, but let's assume that it's a sub 6. Well, no, we'll do a 1500-ish. Okay. So if someone's done a sub 6 2K and they've run a and they can run a sub 6 2K on their feet for the 2 kilometer distance, what would that look like for a 1500? Say if it's at 6 minute pace or sub 6 minute pace, that would be a 4:30 1500. But because it's 1500, not 2K, it's probably a bit quicker. So it might be 4:25. 4:25 is about I guess that would be a 4:35 mile, maybe 4:40 mile for the Americanos of us. 4:40 mile. Whether that would be achievable for someone that's done a sub 6 2K, I'd imagine there's someone that does seem possible. That's about a minute slower than the running world record for the 1500/mile distance. There's a 1600 and see 110 meter, 100 and something meters, 1600 meters versus 1500. The people that are faster at both of those distances. So yeah, can someone run a minute slower than the world record 1500 and pull a sub 6 2K? I believe so. If anyone listening to this podcast has done that or knows someone that has, then let me know. I would like to talk with that person, actually. This next question had the potential to be a good question, but isn't either. And as much as that pains me. And I can tell you why I'm trying to be constructive here. I don't want to just shit on these people because they are still the people that sent in questions, but I want good questions. It helps perpetuate the whole thing here. And I want to give character to what a good question might look like. So, for Masters athletes, is there a healthy way to stay competitive in training and lose weight? Okay, things to know. Masters athletes. I'm a Masters athlete. I'm in that category. I think it's anyone over 35, but 40 plus, you definitely, but it also could mean you're 70. You could just say, how old, if this is the person, Brian, is how old are you, mate? You could just say for a 40 something year old athlete, is there a way to stay competitive in training and lose weight? It does depend on the sport, and it does depend on what you mean by competitive. The other thing to highlight is that you don't want to be competitive in training. You want to be competitive in competition. Training is just an opportunity to prepare for an event, to get better at your craft. If your craft is running, the fitness will be a big element of that. If it's archery, then it's skill-based, and most sports are somewhere between those two. If it's jiu-jitsu, you want to be competitive in training, but only as a means to an end. Let's just assume you say you want to be competitive and lose weight. Are you trying to lose weight, or are you trying to lower body fat and improve body composition? These are important distinctions. So yeah, let's see if that's just take the most charitable interpretation of this question. For masters athletes, is there a healthy way to stay competitive in training and lose weight? Let's interpret competitive as it's top half of the competitors around you. Okay, gee, that's broad. In training, let's assume you mean in competition or wherever it actually matters, and lose weight, then let's assume you mean lose body fat. Yes, there's a healthy way to do that. I would say it also depends quite a bit on how much weight or adipose tissue you have to lose and over what time frame you're prepared to do it. On average, in most circumstances, you would be better served to do it phasically, so away from competition. Post competition, if you think you've got weight to lose, I would say the caveat to all of this is if it's actual weight because you're in a body weight sport, then yes, that's also going to be a feature of your sport. There are unhealthy ways to do it. You do have to create a calorie deficit, which means you could lower intake or increase expenditure. And expenditure is not just moving or exercising more, but I do believe you can facilitate your metabolism to do that. But I also think that reducing energy intake can decrease your metabolism such that even if you lower calories, you're not going to be creating a sufficient deficit, and then you have a downward shit spiral. That would be an unhealthy way. Back to the healthy way. You do it in phases. Take 6 months, 3 months to lose weight, and then take 9 months and 6 months to focus on being the best competitor in whatever sport it is that you do. Send me the details that I'm looking for here if you want me to be more accurate with supporting your ambitions. I'd be happy to do that. For anyone else that's listening that has questions like that, but better. Sorry, guys. Sorry to shit on these guys. Like that, but better, and to do it with more space, which is the limitation that I provided here because I did it via Instagram. Hey, if you've got a question for the pod, do it here, and there's only a tiny little bit of space. So feel free to elaborate. Just DM me. At least one of these people, both of these people already have. You can find me pretty easy. Send me an email. Just contact me. Tell me what your question is. You can ask me in person if you encounter. Say, for the pod, can you help me with this? I'd be happy to do that. Recently, with my guest this week, Angus Dawson, two-time member of the Australian men's Olympic 8. And in the weeks previously, well, in the week prior, in particular, Solo Sam last week, I'd spoken a bit about my time rowing for the Australian national team, and in particular, my involvement with the Australian men's 8. And the key date on the diary every quadrennium is the Olympic Games. And so my participation is oriented largely about being in those Olympic men's 8s and being successful every 4 years. Now, I had some success either side of each of those competitions, just like Angus has, but despite ability to move boats well in numerous contexts, when it most matters at the Olympic Games, the Australian men's 8, unfortunately, since 2004 has gone 6-6, not qualified 6-6. And prior to that, we'd gone silver. Well, not so great in 96, not so great in 92, but in 2000, silver, and in 2004, bronze. And the small boats for Australia at the time, in the pair and the 4, they had mostly medaled or always medaled. So you've got the pair and the 4 and the 8 medaling for 2 Olympic Games. And then at least the pair and 4 tending to medal more often than not. Now that's no longer the case in any regard. My interest mostly has been with the 8 because of my participation in it, and because the guys I rowed with mostly continued to row in it afterwards. It's the fastest boat class. It's the one where, on the continuum of skill to aggression, it leans more aggression than some of the other boat classes. And that resonates with my spirit. And it's also most of my experiences in the 8. So rowing at school, I spent 3 years rowing the 8. So second 8 in year 10, the first 8 in year 11, the first 8 in year 12, and then spent 4 years rowing in Princeton 8s and training mostly in Princeton 8s. So I had 7 years of rowing experience by the time I joined the Australian rowing team. That whole time, not only the boat class that I spent most of the time watching and paying attention to was the men's 8, despite that not being the emphasis back home. Even though we'd had some very good Australian 8s, I'd been around a lot of the guys in the US 8 when they won gold in 2004. And the crews I identified a lot with were because this is when I was rowing at school, were the US 8s 97, 98, 99 that won the World Championships that year. Of all the boats that were rowing at international regattas in that time, the US men's 8 was the one that I paid the most attention to, despite 2 eventual teammates of mine being more successful, winning the 4 and then the pair. We can talk about that another time. There's plenty of reasons to pay attention to fast Australian boats, but I'd never rowed a pair until I had been rowing for several years. And I hadn't rowed a Coxless 4. I'd been in Cox 4s, I'd been in singles, but most of the time I'd been in the 8. That was the boat that I was most interested in being in. So even when I watched Coxless 4s or it was rowing small boats, it was with the vision to end up in the 8. And so my heart and spirit were connected to that before it happened, very much connected to the process and the results. For the 6 years, I was involved in the national team program. And then in the period after, I've wanted nothing for the best for whoever occupied the seats within that boat. And it's been more disappointing than not. And I also believe there are reasons for it. And I also believe there are reasons for the lack of resolution. And resolution would just be success in that boat class that's proportionate to the talent and funding that's available and invested in the people that are rowing that boat. And it's not that I don't care about the women's 8 or the men's 4 or the men's pair. But over time, the people in those boats change. What doesn't change is the boat itself. So the Australian men's eight is always the Australian men's eight, no matter who's in it. And that entity has not enjoyed the success that I believe is been possible, and at times massively underperformed. And then the process of revealing why that's the case, and then doing what's necessary to prevent a reoccurrence hasn't happened. And in a future episode, because there's going to be other people involved in Australian Men's Eight that I'll speak to, and we can kick the tires on this. But I wanted to speak about it today to convey why I'm still interested and why I still have this frustration about it, because there is a part of me, it's like, hey man, just move the fuck on. You're not, I don't identify as a rower. I don't coach a crew. I coach people that row. I coach individual rowers, but I coach people that coach rowing, but I don't have a crew that I'm responsible for. And I'm further and further away from the sport itself. And rowing feels more and more like something that I did rather than a person that I am. I would have called myself a rower at one stage for clarity for someone else, but I think I was always just an athlete rowing, a person that rowed rather than a rower. And nonetheless, I still want I want Australian sport to be successful. I want Australian rowing to be successful. But more than that, I want the Australian men's eight to be successful, because the most people I've spent time rowing with spent the most time in that boat class, as did I. And to have all sorts of people involved and have all those people be successful, sometimes in the same boat class. For example, guys that rowed in the New South Wales Kings Cup and the Victorian Kings Cup, for that matter, that were able to make those boats go very fast and be very competitive, then to get into the Aussie Men's Eight and go overseas and shit the bed is just so disappointing for myself personally, and for a lot of the people that have been in those seats. Some guys have been able to attain Olympic medals before and after, and that might be some consolation. Even if that had been the outcome for me, it wouldn't say, if that was the case in 2012, that wouldn't have changed how mismanaged 2007 and 2008 were. And even if you'd argue, if you're a bureaucrat in RA, maybe you might argue, maybe if you're still there, which you probably aren't, oh no, we did pretty well with what, like you did your job well. Okay, let's assume that's the case. When it mattered, we didn't perform. Now I can point to reasons why, and I can point to who was responsible for that. No one really took the time to clarify what happened, because the people involved, they move on. And then the next cycle, people give it a good crack, and I'm sure everyone's trying really hard. When it goes well, they get celebrated. They usually get asked to stay around, or they get a better offer somewhere else. Everyone else that doesn't, they kind of get the scapegoat to go away and then they're not there to accept responsibility. They can go to other countries. They can go to other sports if they're going to be a administrator in some other sport, because they've been successful in rowing. They can transfer across their bureaucratic skills. But for the rowers, there's nowhere else to go. You row for Australia, and they can change all the coaches and the high performance staff, and then the athlete, are the one constant. And the only thing that is left is they kind of point to who shows back up when there's been an underperformance. It's like, well, you explain what the underperformance was about, but at the same time, not really giving a fuck. Like they can't, because they don't think that has anything to do with them. Literally every cycle, there's a new coach of the Australian Men's Eight, if we're going to be specific. And sometimes there's multiple coaches within the same cycle, which in of itself should tell you there's a problem. And my passion does not conclude because I'm no longer involved. I'm no longer rowing, and yet this is not a problem that has been fixed. And all of that is just to let you know why I'm talking about it. And don't think about it for the most part, but when I'm talking about it with people that have been in that experience, and if I'm reflecting on my own experience, because I came across the thing I read last week, was looking at my files on my computer, and then I thought, oh yeah, I remember that thing, and then that reminds me of this thing, and now I'm thinking about it, and now we're talking about it. Well, I'll elaborate in the future, but not today. We're gonna take a left turn, right turn, talk about my current training as opposed to my former training. And I just wanted to, this is also to do, like, I was looking in my DMs and I'd seen that someone in a Q&A on Instagram previously had asked about humidity in Brisbane. And my response was, it was a little bit more delicate than this, but it was basically, don't be a puss, which I said twice, and adjust as necessary. And I thought that's firm, but fair advice. So that's what I reminded myself of. The good news is I had done that previously, which is equal parts for both. The don't be a puss and adjust accordingly is accepting what is and then adjusting as necessary. And adjusting is just for heat and humidity, lowering the intensity, which for running means running a slower speed than I otherwise would at lower temperatures and lower humidity. My my body weight and my muscle mass mean my susceptibility to heat and humidity is increased. So I'm kind of getting the compounding stresses, but I can be at peace with this because it's got nothing to do with the discomfort or at all. It's everything to do with my effort being what it normally is and having my speed and or power, if I'm on the Echo bike, be lower than what I expect it would be because I have this additional load of heat and humidity. So I'm in a position where I have to run slower, sometimes even stop running and walk because my heart rate is drifting beyond the zones that I want it to be at the intensity that I want it to be, which is to say that you want to do the majority of your aerobic training in low to moderate intensities such that you can build more repeating volume over time. And if your output is intended to be moderate, but because of the environmental situation, your effort, not your perceived effort, but your actual effort in terms of the physiological load is higher, you're no longer in the intended energy zone. And for that to happen on an occasion is one thing, but when this is a dance you're doing 5, 6 days a week, it's something that you have to come to terms with. And that's what I've been doing, because even when it relates to fitness, there's the speed that I want to run at, and then there's the speed I ought to run at this stage. And when I run too fast, there's increased mechanical load, which I'm building the capacity to better tolerate that. That's improving so that my joints can handle more load from running. And that is happening. And I feel good about that. But then there's the fitness, the cardiovascular load. And that's had this impact because of the environment. And so it feels like progress has been limited. The effect of that is that, well, it's twofold. I'm no longer in the energy zones that I want to be in, which is basically ballparking at 145 beats a minute. For me, you could be 2 millimoles. I don't think it matters. You have to define a limit and then hold yourself to do that. How you come across that limit, whether it's lactate tests or heart rate or perceived exertion or nose breathing, yes, all of those can work. You need to find something that works for you. And when I use heart rate, it's more open to influence from, well, the environment, but also stuff like caffeine is going to affect that, but I believe that's okay. I think that the speed limit still exists, but it gets harder to observe that when the environmental factors are compounding. Nonetheless, my strategy currently and moving forward to deal with that is at times I just say fuck it and allow myself to go at the speed that feels natural, which is still not hard. It still feels very moderate, but I watch my heart rate go from 130, 135, 139, and it can do that for the first portion of the run. And then it starts going, well, 142, 145, and I'm thinking, okay, well, I need to back off the intensity. And realistically, I'm feeling like even then I'm moderating the intensity, but now I'm thinking I need to really start backing off. And it feels like I'm either hardly pedaling or hardly running or barely, or not even running, just I have to break down to a walk to allow my heart rate to get within the intended zone. So just for brevity and for basics sake, 120 to 125. And when I'm faced with that choice, on some occasions, which is usually once a week, I say I don't want to do that. And I just keep going at the speed that feels comfortable, the output that feels comfortable, and let my heart rate drift up. And it might finish in the low 160s, which might mean that the last 50 to 25%, I'm not in the intended zone. But in other sessions, and I have to observe the heart rate speed limit regardless of what the output is, knowing that as we trend into the winter, lower temperatures, lower humidity, I should also get a performance boost because I've had this enforced suppression as it was described to me by one person in my DMs. It's the poor man's altitude. So we know that training at altitude provides a performance benefit when you go back down to sea level. This is basically the same thing. And heat training is a type of training that people use in cold climates to provide a performance benefit, but they would use it once or twice a week. Maybe even they would use heat passively so that they would do a training session and then go in a hot tub or a sauna, and that has a performance benefit. But this is every session. The question for next summer for me would be, do I arrange more opportunities to train in a climate controlled environment so there's at least some sessions where my effort and my output feel more in alignment. But for right now, it's more about acceptance. And part of acceptance is adjusting. So there's more fluid, more electrolytes, their adjustments. And the other adjustments are meeting myself where I'm at the time, which is to say that my heart rate is what it is, which is saying something about this is how hard your body is working. And if I want things to be at a moderate intensity, then I have to keep it moderate by any means necessary, even if that's walking, which I probably will be tomorrow because I have a longer run at a moderate intensity. So more time for cardiac drift, which is just your heart rate getting higher over time as your blood volume decreases. This is dehydrated, less minerals, uh, working harder, heart rate goes up, and then you get this drift. So I have to offset that by managing my intensity, which means both going out at an easier intensity and then adjusting as necessary for so this if I have to walk, then I'll fucking walk. And even just saying this reaffirms my commitment to that process. So, good for me. Other adjustments that have helped is knowing that all else being equal, more moderate sessions are going to drift to higher intensities. And so there's a slight likelihood increase that intensity will be higher despite my best efforts because there is this occasional sessions and it's certainly going to be elevated rather than suppressed heart rate for effort. And as your intensity increases, so does your utilization of carbohydrates as compared to fats. at all intensities, there's both. Well, most intensities, but as it's at lower and more moderate intensities, you're using more fat relative to carbs. As your intensity increases, the amount of carbs increase and the amount of fats stay the same or decrease. The reason this is relevant is that there's been sessions previously where I've tried to, excuse me, it's disgusting. Still got the sniffles, obviously, not talking about it this week. Where were we? Carbs. If intensities drift higher and carb demand increases, and I haven't provided sufficient fuel because I haven't been habituated to increasing my carb requirements, and I've been trying to create a calorie deficit such as I can bring my body mass down to something that supports my running ambitions, which is also working. We're also doing that. But if I get the balance wrong and I don't have enough carbs, then when my body requires carbs, it's going to turn protein, which it's already using, or perhaps even muscle tissue. It's going to convert protein and or muscle into carbs. The process is gluconeogenesis, which is just the conversion of protein into glycogen. It's both inefficient and it also it leaches your muscle, which is not great because you want to hold on to that, even if it's like this, my chest, shoulders, that it's not going to help my running or really my deadlifting, but I don't want to be a complete dweeb either, and I'd rather just use fuel for energy rather than muscle, especially as we age. We want to hold on to as much muscle as possible and a reminder that we are all aging. So I don't want to use the protein that I'm eating because I want that to go into support the muscle that I have, and I want to hold on to the muscle I have rather than use that for energy. And there's been too many times because I've been working too hard and I've got this negotiation wrong where I've just allowed the intensity to drift too high and I've been undercarbed and carbs need to come from somewhere. And there are signs of this. Mainly, your sweat smells like ammonia for anyone that's experienced this. And I've spent a good portion of my athletic career with this smell because I've had a willingness to work hard, sometimes harder than necessary or harder than I ought to. And I've been provided insufficient fuel, and that exposes you to muscle. It's basically catabolic. If you've got anabolism is things that increase muscle mass, and catabolism is the opposite. Those things that decrease, and it's usually using muscle for energy, or muscle, if it's not used, will atrophy. Both are catabolic, but this is how you could be catabolic despite being in the training process. And I just keep pushing because I have goals, which to me are commitments, and then you are in the pursuit of those. But sometimes you're so in it that you're not observing these things that you know are indicators of a thing that's not positive. You don't want to be smelling like ammonia. On occasion, there would be a benefit, some upregulation of some adaptive qualities to have a session every now and then where you are being purposefully depleted, but that can't be most of your sessions. And there's been chunks of time as I've brought my body weight down from 124 kilos to about 104 now, 20 kilos with 45 pounds for cheeseburger unit friends in America. 45 pounds, 20 kilos, and increased cardio. There's needed to be a deficit, and there's needed to be an increase in cardio for my goals, not for the weight loss. Those things, it's not necessary. It can be helpful, but not if you get this balance off, which I have. And I've been adjusting over time, and things are now trending in a right direction. So don't be a puss, is to accept what is and adjust. For me, has been all of those other things I've just described. The other thing I wanted to touch on with regards to this process of mine of changing aspirations as life has evolved. And I think it's a good thing for a person to have a goal or have a hobby and to pursue it passionately for a period of time and to feel like they've sunk enough into that it no longer makes sense to pursue that particular goal and for the effort and emphasis to shift to something else. So for me, this was rowing and then indoor rowing and then powerlifting and then maintaining the attributes that I built previously, in particular the strength and muscle mass, which I think is my actual form. I think that was suppressed whilst I was rowing, both from the activity and on purpose. And then this is more of my natural form. Running a marathon under 3 hours is not natural for me. Being strong is the reason to have the deadlift goal in part is because I think I can do it, but also because if not for that, then I might just allow myself to become a runner when that's not what I want to be. I want to be me who can run fast enough to achieve my goals, not the fastest runner I can be. That's not quite the interest, but I can see how for someone else, or even for me at a different point in time, that might be the goal. The point is that it's fine to evolve your goals over time. There's other aspirations I have, which depends on the way things go. I'll get to them. Like I'd love to dunk. That would be cool. Marathon training is basically like the worst thing you could do to train to learn how to dunk. But I think, okay, maybe if I can tick, well, not even maybe, when I tick the marathon box next year, then I could spend the next 7 years and try and dunk by the time I'm 50. There's not currently anyone over the age of 50 that's gone under 6 minutes for a 2K. I have no aspirations on the erg on any of them, really, mostly because I feel like I've slayed that dragon, or at least if I haven't slayed it, I've certainly fought enough of those dragons. But there's something that appeals to me when something hasn't been done before. I don't know what I'm going to feel like doing when I'm 50. I know that I'll still be training, but maybe by then I'll be trying to dunk or swim the English Channel. That sounds horrible, but just it could be it could be any number of, you don't have to be tied to the thing now. You just have to think, oh, those are cool things to do. I reckon I could do that. Okay, well, it can't just be that you reckon you could do it. You've also got to be prepared to set aside 5 or maybe 10 years, maybe 2 years, maybe a year, depending on what the thing is. But you can't just want to do the thing. You've also got to be willing to undertake the process to do that thing. For me, if I were to, I wouldn't do things differently again, but I would say that there may be a benefit in doing the goals in an order that supports the likelihood of success. So for me, if off the back of rowing when I stopped rowing around 2013, there was a time where I was lifting more weights, but I was also running more because I was rowing less and still training just as hard. And this was pre my fastest ever 2K in 2015, my 1K ski erg world record in, I think later that year, 2015, my 1K world record on the row erg in 2017, and my faster 500s in 2017, 2018. And then leaning into getting as strong as possible. That made sense in terms of a natural progression as I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do post rowing. I allowed myself to get stronger. I was also contemplating running at that stage, but it got to a point where lifting weights and then running 30Ks, adding size. I was also playing around with intermittent fasting, had to consolidate and focus on, let's just get strong and enjoy being able to do that for the first time in like 15 years. Because it was when I started lifting weights, it was get strong, get big. And then as I focused more on rowing, it was lift weights for rowing, which for me wasn't get strong and or big, which is the fun part of lifting weights. it does more than that: injury prevention, range of motion, durability, stability. But get big and strong, they're the fun parts. I digress. As I got stronger, that helped me realize my potential, the shorter distances on the erg. And then as I did that, I realized that I could just focus more on the strength aspect, which is the sport of powerlifting. That is a natural progression to then go from there to running a marathon. It would have been better if I just vanquished the marathon gods, the marathon dragons in 2013 and then lent into it. But then I would have had a different timeline, and it's just hypothetical, and I don't even think it would be better. It would just be better from it doesn't feel like I'm starting from scratch currently, but it's been a bit of a transition to go from as anaerobic and as strong as possible to really trying to extend myself on the aerobic front in a way that was challenging, even when that's what I was doing exclusively. But I'm here for it. I'm learning a lot. I'm trying to share aspects of that as I go. I thank you for being here with me today. Send in some questions if you have them. Please be good questions, but do your best. Just you keep trying and I'll keep trying. And if you're still listening to this, then you're one of the real ones. And I appreciate you, and I'll talk to you next week.